Welcome to the Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, a program dedicated to uncovering the unified nature of reality and humanity's ever-evolving place as truly galactic beings. For more information on the Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit us online at www.thescienceofmagic.net.
Welcome to the Science of Magic, a place where science and magic come together to transform fact into evolving truth. We're coming to you through the X-Zone Broadcast Network, xzbn.net. We can also be found on www.thescienceofmagic.net. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. This hour we'll be exploring plant helpers. There are virtually as many shamanic cultures on the planet as we have nationalities. One of the many things they all have in common are foundations firmly rooted in herbology, no pun intended. Having studied many shamanic practices from around the world, my education includes strong medical intuitive skills as well as a formidable body of knowledge on the use of plant helpers to correct imbalances that lead to sickness and disease of the body, emotions, mind, or soul. From mullein root and garlic tincture for ear infections to bear root for lung congestion, I've supported my children's health from birth to the present day using herbs and natural remedies. However, I am not an herbal Nazi. While our plant helpers are gentle, balanced corrections, they can indeed work miracles. They are very refined. Our world has become extremely polluted and coarse. Years ago, what used to take a gentle nudge to regain balance now may require something akin to a nuclear bomb. Our daughter was 18 months old when suddenly one evening she developed a deep cough. After only a couple of hours, it worsened dramatically. Imagine my husband's amazement when instead of brewing one of my concoctions, I yelled at him, "Warm the car, we're going to Children's Hospital now." It didn't sound that bad to him, yet. We spent the next week in the croup room of the hospital fighting for her life. She was on steroids, intravenous antibiotics, oxygen, adrenaline inhalers, and the good Lord only knows what else. I have no doubt that if I would have taken time to try to alleviate or medicate my child without seeking allopathic means, she would have died. I'm the founder and director of a Colorado State Certified Occupational School of the Shamanic Arts. In addition to being a shamanic instructor, I'm a preceptor for the University of Colorado School of Medicine, where I instruct doctors on the interface between shamanism and allopathic medicine. Many times my students have asked how I reconcile being a so-called medicine person and interfacing with the allopathic medical system. My answer? You can't shovel poop with a feather. Our sweet, gentle, yet powerful plant helpers were not designed for the degree of imbalance our poor planet and her people are subjected to in these modern times. However, plant teachers continue to be of great value. Personally, I'm so drug sensitive I probably would not be here without them. There's been a ridiculous, needless war going on between herbology and allopathic medicine that hurts many and helps no one. Both modalities have their place, and it's long past time they are not only allowed but encouraged to work together. I believe this dispute is driven and propagated by economics, not our doctors or our herbologists, with no consideration for the well-being of our people. There are conditions and illnesses that will not respond to herbs, well, at least not in time. The imbalance is just simply too great. There are other innumerous minor imbalances that can be prevented from becoming major ones by the proper, timely, and educated use of quality herbal treatments, reducing the need for overuse of antibiotics and all the problems associated therein. There are also many so-called incurable diseases that have been greatly improved, if not healed, by diet and herbs. All the above require well-trained practitioners to manage them, not some half-cocked, overpriced, shotgun self-treatment of dubious potency found on the internet. Every household should be well versed in CPR, emergency medical treatment, and basic home remedies, and in possession of tried and true texts on all three subjects written by recognized authorities. My guest this hour is one of those authorities. EVERT HOPMAN is the author of Secret Medicines from Your Garden, Plants for Healing, Spirituality, and Magic. Hopman is the author of a number of books and has been a teacher of herbalism since 1983 and of Druidism since 1990. She is a professional member of the American Herbalist Guild and has presented on Druid and herbal lore and tree lore. I will introduce Ellen and her formidable body of work after this short break. You are listening to The Science of Magic. This and other innovative episodes can always be found on our website, www.thescienceofmagic.net.
Searching through the night, one people, one nation, searching for the light. One people, one nation, coming from the stars. One people,
The scientist and the mystic have been on an age-old, relentless search with one thing in common. They seek truth. Their paths converge in the 40,000-year-old practice of shamanism, an ancient science delving to the quantum level of life, facilitating healing, manifestation, and evolution. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, the founder and director of Path Home Shamanic Arts School, a unique Colorado State certified occupational school training shamanic practitioners and teachers. We also provide classes for empowering personal lives through shamanism. Our certification classes are in week-long segments enabling international participation, and online classes and long-distance shamanic healing sessions are available. Come discover the science of magic in the limitless world of shamanism. www.findyourpathhome.com. Welcome back. This is The Science of Magic, dedicated to unification and evolution of consciousness. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. Our guest this hour is Ellen Hopman, the author of Secret Medicines from Your Garden, Plants for Healing, Spirituality, and Magic. www.elleneverthopman.com. Ellen, thanks so much for joining us on The Science of Magic.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
What originally sparked your interest in herbology?
Well, I'm a product of this culture, and oddly, when I was a teenager, I did have a very intense desire to know how to go out in the woods and find food, and I wasn't thinking in terms of medicine at that time, but there was this nagging feeling that I had in the back of my mind that I had to know how to do this. And it wasn't coming from my school. It wasn't coming from any family tradition, although my mother was a gardener. That was about it. But I just had this sense, and I had no idea where to look, of course, for any of this. And later, when I was a graduate student, I was at Temple University getting a degree in art history, and they sent me to Italy on a scholarship. It wasn't my idea. They said, "You're going to Italy and you're going to study Renaissance art." And I said, "Okay," because I really wanted to study photography, but they sent me to Rome. And make a long story short, I do write about this in great detail in the book, Secret Medicines from Your Garden, but I ended up going to Assisi to look at the frescoes of Giotto in the cathedral there. And I was looking at these frescoes, and they're all about the life of St. Francis. They're these medieval frescoes on the wall, and they're covered with gold leaf and gold paint. And something just didn't seem right, because I knew enough about St. Francis to know that he was all about simplicity and being with nature and poverty and all that. So I looked around in the cathedral. I looked for a priest or a monk, somebody that I could talk to. And I found this little guy in brown robes. He was a Franciscan. I walked up to him and I said, how can I find out more about the real St. Francis, how he actually lived? And he said, go to San Maceo. And I said, what is that? And he said, don't ask any questions, just go. And he pointed down the road, so down I went. And there was this little wooden sign. It said San Maceo off to the right. On the left was San Damiano, which is the church of St. Clare. And so I followed the sign off to the right, walked down this little muddy path through the bushes, came to this clearing. There were all these people lounging around on the grass. It was the middle of the day. Most of them were German. And they said, oh, have you come here to live? And I said, I don't know. I didn't even know what the place was. And so they explained that it was a Franciscan community, and there were basically people were living in sheepfolds. They were medieval sheepfolds, and there was no hot water. It was just cold water. The mattresses were straw. Animals were free to go wherever they wanted. There were ducks and chickens wandering in and out of the buildings. Bread was baked in a stone oven. There were gardens. And I stayed for a few days. And then I went back to Rome, packed up all my stuff, came back, and stayed for a few weeks after that. So I had this kind of mystical experience. Every Wednesday you were supposed to fast, spend the whole day fasting, and the only thing you could have was water or herbal tea. And we had Mass twice a day. So one Wednesday, they told us to just wander in the desert, just go out without any preconceived idea of where you're going or what you're doing, just walk. So I just followed my own feet, and I ended up on top of Mount Subasio, which is a mountain where St. Francis used to go. And while I was up there, there was this huge storm, thunder, lightning, snow. And I was above the tree line, so there was nothing up there except grass and one little tiny pine tree. And I wrapped myself around the pine tree, which was pretty stupid, but I didn't know that because it was the only other living thing up there. And when it was over, it passed very quickly. I came down the hill singing at the top of my lungs. And at the bottom of the hill, across from San Damiano, was this little chapel that St. Francis had built with his own hands. And I went in there. It was dark, and I was the only person in there. It was pre-Gothic, so it was very dark. So I was sitting there in the dark.
Excuse me, but for those of us without a Catholic background, would you mind telling us what St. Francis is the saint of?
St. Francis is actually the patron saint of ecology, believe it or not. He was a guy who used to preach naked, and he used to talk. He would preach to birds.
I like the guy already.
Yeah, well, he also considered, he talked about brother sun, sister moon, sister fire. He considered water to be sacred, fire to be sacred, the moon, the sun. He was totally into nature. And actually, if you want to find out where he got his training, which is something that most people don't talk about, he studied with Hildegard of Bingen.
I was going to say, he sounds pretty shamanic to me.
Well, of course. It was very shamanic. I mean, he was big into fasting, and he would go into caves and eat oatmeal gruel with nothing but oatmeal with maybe, he actually would put ashes in there because he didn't want to enjoy it too much. That's very Catholic, beat yourself up bad. But he studied with Hildegard of Bingen, who was a very interesting woman who doesn't get enough credit. She was a Renaissance woman before the Renaissance. She was trained in a Celtic monastic tradition, where men and women lived together in community. And anyway, it's worth it if you look at, she wrote poetry, she wrote medical books, she was a doctor, she wrote, I think it was an opera. Anyway, and she was in the Celtic tradition, which, as if you've ever looked at Celtic tradition, is very nature-based. So that's who St. Francis.
Hey, do you harvest your own herbs?
Yes, I do. I wildcraft a lot, and in the book, there's a lot about wildcrafting. But I just want to finish this story very quickly. I went into this chapel that was very dark, and I heard a voice, and the voice said, everything you've been doing up until now, which was working on my master's thesis, has been for status and intellect, and to please your parents, you're supposed to be working with plants. And I knew that it was correct. It was this voice that was coming from inside of me and outside of me at the same time. And after that, I just basically gave up everything, all my possessions, sold everything I had, dropped the master's program. Everybody got mad at me. And and then I started studying herbalism, and then I've been doing it ever since.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So to this day, you are working with herbs, and I asked, do you harvest your herbs? Do you do that locally?
Well, yes. I live in the woods. I live in an oak forest, so there's very little light here. It's not possible for me to have a big herb garden. The only place I can grow anything is right around the house, and that's even hard. So that forces me to go out and wildcraft. I'm very conscious and very careful about the way I do it. There's nothing worse than finding a beautiful stand of something, blue cosh or something like that, and the next year you go back and it's all gone because somebody dug it all up. That just breaks my heart. I even stopped taking people on herb walks for a few years because I was so upset when I saw that happening.
My background is Native American mostly, and we always ask permission, and we always only take just a little from each plant, not hack the whole thing down. And what's scary to me is how quickly our wild and natural herbs are actually disappearing, because they have a way of holding constituents and changing every year to our needs that the domestic ones don't. Do you agree with this?
Well, the climate is changing constantly, which kind of means that the plants are going to be changing constantly. I mean, we're in a time of change right now. So I'm not a chemist. I can't, I haven't been able to evaluate what kind of changes are going on in the plants. But what you said earlier, it's very important. I was taught, I learned this from a Penobscot woman. She said, you walk by the first 8, you leave the 8th for the animals, you walk by the first 7, you leave the 8th for the animals, and you can take the 9th. And that's very
pretty much
important.
Pretty much the same policy, huh?
Right, because there's a couple of things going on there. You want plants to be available the next year, and they're not going to be there if you take everything. There's going to be no seeds, there's going to be no propagation, and you won't have anything. Also, the animals need the plants, and everything from the bees and the butterflies to the raccoons and the badgers and the deer, everybody needs these plants. It's not just us, everybody needs the medicines. So we have to be extremely conscious, when we take things.
Exactly.
And of course, we have to work.
Exactly.
Yeah, we have
do you supplement your wild harvesting with prepared or imported herbs?
Yes, I do, because I live in New England, and there's a very short growing season. So there are certain things that I run out of. For example, I always have comfrey growing in the yard, very important plant. Everybody should have it. But again, I can only grow a certain amount. And I actually ran out of comfrey this winter because I was making so many salves. And I had to order organic comfrey, Sure. But in general, I prefer to use things that are local, that grow around me, and that's what I like to teach people. And hopefully, when they learn the plants that grow in their own area, and when they consciously, very carefully harvest, hopefully they will appreciate nature.
We're going to have to take a quick break. I'm sorry to interrupt you. We will return to our discussion after this short break. You're listening to The Science of Magic. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. You want to hear more? Other innovative episodes can always be found on our website, www.thescienceofmagic.net.
One people, one nation,
The scientist and the mystic have been on an age-old, relentless search with one thing in common. They seek truth. Their paths converge in the 40,000-year-old practice of shamanism, an ancient science delving to the quantum level of life, facilitating healing, manifestation, and evolution. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, the founder and director of Path Home Shamanic Arts School, a unique Colorado State certified occupational school training shamanic practitioners and teachers. We also provide classes for empowering personal lives through shamanism. Our certification classes are in week-long segments enabling international participation, and online classes and long-distance shamanic healing sessions are available. Come discover the science of magic in the limitless world of shamanism. www.findyourpathhome.com.
You're listening to the X Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net.
Welcome back. This is the Science of Magic, a place where magic and science come together to promote enlightenment. We can be found on www.thescienceofmagic.net. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. Our guest this hour is EVERT Hopman, the author of Secret Medicines from Your Garden, Plants for Healing, Spirituality, and Magic. Her website, www.ellenevertthopman.com. Welcome back, Ellen.
Hi, thank you.
We were just talking about wild and natural harvested versus having to import ones to fill in. What's the difference between the two in your opinion?
Well, if you're ordering plants from far away, for example, China, India, places like that, the plants are going to be irradiated, and they all have to be irradiated or sprayed in order to get through borders. So I know there are people who like to work with plants from China and India and so on, and that's great. But personally, it doesn't resonate with me. I don't like that. I prefer organic, commercially grown, not necessarily wildcrafted. I mean, because if you buy wildcrafted plants, that's probably somebody who is harvesting a lot of wild plants, and that's getting to be a problem. So the best thing to look for is commercially grown organic, and from your local area. If you're in Canada, try to buy from Canada. If you're in the U.S., buy from the U.S. That's
why would you say that? Why?
Because then they won't be irradiated, or hopefully they won't be sprayed or irradiated, because it's when they cross the international borders that they try to get rid of all possible pathogens, and they're just not as healthy. And also, it's very important to get to know the plants in your immediate area, because I believe, and this is what I tell my students, I think that nature is much smarter than we are, and nature is always trying to give us what we need. For example,
that was exactly what I was looking for. Is when it's grown close to where we are, the meridians of the earth are aligned with us, and therefore the plants are aligned with us, and vice versa. Is that what you're getting to?
Well, I'll tell you a story. Here in New England, the Lyme disease epidemic. Lyme disease has been around for thousands of years, but we're currently experiencing an epidemic, and I have a lot of different thoughts about it. But the epicenter is Lyme, Connecticut. That's where it exploded. So what happened? There's this plant called Japanese knotweed, which is considered a quote-unquote invasive. And so there are people who get very upset when they see it, and they want to hack it out and get rid of it. Well, what happened was, as the Lyme disease progressed, guess what followed? The Japanese knotweed. Guess what's one of the best herbs for Lyme disease? Japanese knotweed. So I really feel that nature is going, hey, look, here's what you need.
I love it. And here we think we're so smart, right?
Exactly. We're smarter than nature. That's what, excuse me, the other way around. I haven't had my coffee.
So what's your stance on allopathic medicine?
Well, I really appreciate what you said earlier in the show, because there's a time to use it and there's a time not to use it. It's fabulous for emergency care. If somebody if someone has a car accident, really bad burns over their whole body, lots of broken bones, or in your case, what was it, whooping cough?
It was my daughter's case. It was croup.
Croup, okay.
Mm-hmm.
If it's a really, really serious, acute emergency condition, by all means go to the emergency room. Very important. But where herbs are better is if it's a long-term chronic condition, something that goes on and on and on and on. It could be a low-level thing that goes on for years, some kind of chronic systemic condition. That's where the herbs are actually going to be superior, I think, because our bodies are not really designed to work with the high-powered synthetic medicines for long periods of time. They end up
thank goodness they're there when you need them. But my rule of thumb is start gentle and move to the big guns, or start with the big guns and you need them, and then back off to what's gentler. And I found that tends to work. I noticed throughout your book you advised your readers to seek professional medical help, and I commend you on being so vigilant and responsible in that regard. Why do you think some people have become so distrustful of our allopathic medical system?
Well, like I said, a lot of people react to the medicines that they give us. I think 70,000 people a year die from over-the-counter and doctor-prescribed drugs. It's interesting. The FDA, that goes after herbalists, tries to shut down herbalists. Right? I mean, echinacea was on the hit list at one point. Garlic was on the hit list. They really go after herbalists. But the fact that 70,000 people a year are dying from complications from regular medicine doesn't seem to be an issue.
I know, and I do know it's also very economically based. However, let's be the devil's advocate, I've seen a lot of people react to herbal medicines that have been misused out of ignorance and get very, very ill, right. And I've known of several deaths.
Okay, well, that's absolutely correct. If you don't know what you're doing, for example, golden seal, I see people abusing golden seal right and left, which is also becoming an endangered species, by the way, because of over-harvesting in the wild. But golden seal is an antibiotic. It's no different than any antibiotic that you're going to get from a doctor. And, I even knew one person, this is horrible, she took it, her quote-unquote practitioner, whoever this was, told her that she needed cleansing and that she should take 2 capsules 4 times a day for a year.
Oh, my goodness. I know how important cleansing is because our world is so toxic. But what most people don't seem to understand is that there is a very specific order that we should be doing cleansing in, and it differs from disease to disease, and it differs from person to person. Did you address that in your book, perchance?
Well, I try to talk about different herbs and give cautions associated with every herb. And, if you're diabetic, don't do this. If you're pregnant, don't do this. If you have high blood pressure, don't do this. There are specific cautions that you need to know about herbs. And there's certain herbs, for example, golden seal, that when you take it, you have to follow up with other things. You can't just take golden seal and then for weeks or months or years and then go on your merry way. You have to follow up. You have to restore your intestinal flora. So I tried throughout the book to do that with every plant that I listed, and I even have a chapter in the back with some basic cautions. But the thing is, this information changes all the time because research is constantly coming out. So if people are going to use a particular herb for a long time, and by that I mean anything more than a week or 2, please do your research and see what the latest
that brings up, sorry to interrupt, that brings up another question, another burning question. Because, so far we've really established that nobody has any business going out there buying stuff off the internet and self-treating with herbs, because herbs are a powerful medicinal. On the other hand, how does a person find? I mean, there's not the regulation out there for herbologists, I don't believe, that there is for medical personnel. How do we know we're getting good advice, that we're getting a good practitioner?
Well, there are ways that people get trained. For example, if someone is a professional member of the American Herbalist Guild, that's pretty reputable. If someone has graduated from a naturopathic school like John Bastyr or the National College of Naturopathic Medicine or any of the other genuine certified naturopathic schools that are out there, that's a pretty good indication. Just make sure that whoever you're working with actually has some training,
And all training isn't equal either. Yeah.
Right.
Well, thank you so very much. We're going to have to take another break here. We will be back on the flip side of this short break. You're listening to The Science of Magic. Our theme song, One People, One Nation, is from the Winds of Time album by my musical group Starfire and can be found on iTunes.com, cdbaby.com, amazon.com, and my website, gwildawiyaka.com.
One people, one nation, searching through the night. One people, one nation, searching for the light. One people, one nation, coming from the stars. One people, one nation, to heal this earth of ours.
The scientist and the mystic have been on an age-old, relentless search with one thing in common. They seek truth. Their paths converge in the 40,000-year-old practice of shamanism, an ancient science delving to the quantum level of life, facilitating healing, manifestation, and evolution. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, the founder and director of Path Home Shamanic Arts School, a unique Colorado State certified occupational school training shamanic practitioners and teachers. We also provide classes for empowering personal lives through shamanism. Our certification classes are in week-long segments enabling international participation, and online classes and long-distance shamanic healing sessions are available. Come discover the science of magic in the limitless world of shamanism. www.findyourpathhome.com. Welcome back. This is The Science of Magic, a place where magic and science come together to promote enlightenment. We can be found on www.thescienceofmagic.net. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. This hour, our special guest is Ellen Hopman, the author of Secret Medicines from Your Garden, Plants for Healing, Spirituality, and Magic. Her website, www.elleneverethopman.com. Ellen, speaking of spirituality, talk to me about spirituality and herbs.
Well, the herbs have a spirit, first of all, and as you get to know individual plants, you'll find out that each of them is very different. They have a very different spirit. For example, sage, most people are very familiar with sage, and cedar are plants that will put you in the proper frame of mind for prayer. I think most people are familiar with those. You burn it, or you can even make a tea, and it helps you if you're going into ceremony. It just puts you in the right frame of mind to communicate with Great Spirit or your own higher self. That's just one example.
And that's very well put. Of course, being a shaman, I work with herbs and spirituality and ceremony all the time. But there's one thing that I have taken a very strong note of and was taught very strongly, is that it's not just the herb. It's the interaction between the intent of the practitioner and the constituent parts of the herb. Can you speak to this?
Well, you need to be open, receptive, and humble. And one of the things that I teach and that I write about in the book is the doctrine of signatures, and it's a way of communicating with plants, and you open all your senses, your sense of touch, your sight, your sense of smell, even your heart. You open all your senses to a plant, and then the plant spirit can enter you, and you can enter the plant. So if you need healing, or if you want to do healing for somebody else, if you can be in communion with that plant spirit, that's when the magic happens, really.
It's amazing, isn't it? Because it's like the way I kind of think of it is frequency. That as a shamanic practitioner, I need to be a frequency master. My body needs to be a tuning fork. And if my body's out of tune, or if I'm trying to take on an imbalance to be a counter corrector to an illness in another person, using an herb that carries that particular balance really, really helps me to become what I need to be in order to facilitate their rebalancing. Is this what you're talking about?
Sure, that's definitely part of it. Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. And yeah, I mean, I work with plants in a lot of different ways. One thing I love to do is just work with trees. And if somebody needs a particular tree, yes, you can make a tea or a tincture of the buds or the berries or the leaves, but you can also have someone just sit next to a tree. And I've seen amazing things happen. People who were clinically depressed just sit next to a tree, and say a very grounding tree like an oak. You just leave them there, and you don't even have to say a word. You just leave them there, and then within 15 minutes or so, they start to cry, and they break down, and all that stuff comes out. And you don't have to say anything, because the tree knows how to do it. And there's another wonderful tree, the yew tree. If somebody has chemical poisoning and something that they haven't been able to clear out of their system, if they just sit with a yew tree, which of course yew is a poison. It's a toxic plant. Everything is poisonous except for the red flesh of the berry. But if you put a person who is poisoned next to a yew tree, the yew tree will rearrange their body and eliminate the poison. And I know
just love trees for that reason. It's like there's something, of course, the Native Americans worshiped them because they called them the standing people. They reach to the heavens with their leaves, and they reach equally distant into the earth with their roots. And there's something about that connection between earth and sky that really promotes healing and balance in human beings. And I've seen so much magic happen that way myself. And speaking of magic, how do you relate herbology with magic?
Well, it's a form of magic. As we were saying, if you enter into a spiritual relationship with a plant, say you enter into a spiritual relationship with a living plant, a tree, for example, that tree is going to be in communication with trees for 50 square miles around. You know, it can carry messages. I have a book out called The Druid's Herbal of Sacred Tree Medicine, which goes into this in great detail. But poplar trees, for example, are very good at carrying messages because of the way the leaves flutter in the wind.
Uh-huh.
And so you can send your intention out into the wind that way. Oaks are very good for grounding something because the roots go down exactly as deep as the branches go high. Pine, of course, is great for bringing peace to a situation. Every one of these trees has a different quality. Hawthorn has these amazing thorns, which can be, I hate to say it, but you can use the thorns to curse something, but you can also use the thorns to protect something. Hawthorn thorns protect the heart. They're very protective, and of course the berries and the leaves and the flowers are very protective of the human heart. But the thorns themselves can be like a protective hedge around somebody's heart if their heart is broken.
You know, isn't that the way with all herbs or everything for that matter? Is there is no good, there is no bad. Everything can be used for either one. It's a matter of your intent and how you use it. Do you find you're able to speak to the trees?
I try to listen to the trees. Yes, I do speak to them, but I mostly try to listen to them because I figure they know more than I do. Especially if I'm with a tree like a redwood, for example. I mean, I've had the experience of going inside of a sequoia, and getting messages from the tree, or yes, I get messages from trees. The way they send me messages is usually through an image. They'll send me a picture of something, and they don't speak to me in words, although there are people I know that actually hear voices, but I get images. That's how I communicate with them.
So you get visual images?
Visual images, yeah.
What kind?
It's kind of like, well, they show me something. For example, the example of the sequoia. When I went inside the sequoia, I lay down inside. This is in Muir Woods in California. And the tree started showing me these pictures. And it was showing me the landscape all around, which was this yellow grass, which is wild oat. Wild oat is one of the Bach flower remedies, which is used for finding your purpose in life. So the tree was kind of showing me that's why people get attracted to go to California. That's why people keep going west. Everybody keeps going west, or they used to, because the wild oat was pulling them to find their purpose in life. The tree also showed me how the redwoods are in connection with the stars. That's why they're so tall. All the action in redwoods is up at the top. You get this huge
Just
trunk,
amazing.
and then the green.
I hate to do this. Time goes so fast, but it sounds like it's time for us to come to an end. This has been The Science of Magic. Remember, you can always listen to this and other thought-provoking episodes on our website, www.thescienceofmagic.net. Until next time, dear ones, may you be blessed with knowledge, comforted with love, and supported by our plant helpers.
One people, one nation, searching through the night. One people, one nation.